We've all heard the term lady in the streets and freak in the sheets. That's what we're getting into today on the Psychology of Black Womanhood podcast. We're so glad you're here. I'm Dr. Dion Stevens, the co-author of the Psychology of Black Womanhood book, and I'm also a psychology professor. When we're talking about this lady in the streets and freak in the sheets narrative, what we're really looking at is the good girl, bad girl sexual script that Black women are expected to navigate while really creating this double bind for us. From respectability politics and purity myths to these hypersexual stereotypes of desirability, these sexual scripts are really shaping how we as Black women are seen, judged, and treated by our intimate partners and even in public life. Think about Megan Thee Stallion and Cardi B. They make this tension really visible. Their images are often flattened into this hot girl explicit personas that don't necessarily reflect the full reality of their lives or identities. And this is really concerning as research is showing us that awareness of these stigmatizing race-based scripts is linked to higher sexual guilt and attachment avoidance in Black women. This episode features Dr. Nikki Coleman, an award-winning licensed psychologist, sexologist, and founder of Dr. Nikki Knows. With over 20 years of experience, she helps high-achieving Black women own their authenticity, practice self-compassion, and experience intimacy using her signature framework, The Sanctuary. A former tenured professor turned entrepreneur, her work blends cultural expertise and psychological depth. Her offerings include public speaking, workshops, and therapy, all rooted in the belief that pleasure is a birthright. Dr. Nikki is also the creator of The Pleasure Pursuit, a guided planning journal for cultivating joy. It's like full circle here for me to come back and talk to you about this work. Talking offline. I guess it's been over 20 years since we've been in contact.
Which is crazy.
I know. You've really kind of have this unique lens that incorporates both the research and the clinical. I appreciate that's what you're going to bring to this conversation about the good girl and the bad girl binary. Define for us what we're talking about when you're saying there's a good girl and a bad girl myth that Black women have to negotiate.
Yes. Because I think we know it inherently, but I think it's really important to lay it out, right? And I think the good girl is actually the one that's more clear for folks. She's the one who is successful. She's the one who followed the rules, or at least followed them well enough that she's been a leader in her family and her community. She's the one that's a role model. She's responsible. She takes care of other people around her. Most importantly, she doesn't cause trouble for her family. She graduates high school. She definitely goes to college. She gets a great job. She probably goes back to get at least a master's degree for upward mobility. She's the go-to person for everyone in the family. And she's probably married. But the sense of self has become more and more disconnected over time because there's been a lot of reward for that success and what it looks like, and very little reward for taking up space, very little reward about asking herself what lights her up, what brings her joy, very little reward for putting up boundaries in relationship or even saying that's too much or no. And so that leads to a lot of disconnection around her access to pleasure. And then we have the bad girl. And the bad girl is the one that sort of says, for whatever reason, I probably won't be able to meet these expectations. Right. And so I'm not going to even try. And I think oftentimes the bad girl may even be a person that has normative access to her sexuality and is not ashamed of that, right? The conditioning from either religion or cultural respectability just doesn't land on her the same. And because people don't really know what to do with that, she is seen as an outlier. And the thing of having a bad reputation still exists. So sometimes there's a myth and ethos around the bad girl that might not actually be true, but she's seen as someone that is not to be taken as seriously. And so even if she has intellect or has upward mobility aspirations, they're diminished in some way because she's seen as leaning forward with her sexuality. And so it sort of invalidates her talent, her skills, her intellect. It's seen through this lens. And so there's a level oftentimes I see of resistance that gets turned into rebellion. And so a moment in which there's a decision of like, well, I'm never going to be accepted in the broader, community or system. So let me just go ahead and say F it. And I'm gonna fully lean into this. And oftentimes she also gets like locked out of access to partnership, right? Men are socialized too to want the good girl. They don't want the hoe. They don't want the freak in the sheets, right? So I think for the bad girl, there's more social and interpersonal costs in their relationships than the good girl experiences.
I love how you tied in that it's like a reputation. So it's this performance piece. So what about good girls that can enact bad girl pieces? Like we said, the lady in the streets and the freak in the bed.
Yes.
How do they negotiate that? And how is that defined?
I'm not sure that you really can without being attached to a man. I think that you get to be a freak in the sheets when you're married. Like when you're in a committed relationship. I think that if you are not tied to a man, then you still don't have access to that. You have to pick one or the other. And I speak from personal experience, right? Of like, oh, I didn't know you were like that, Doc, right? Like, oh, I thought you were the smart girl. People really do not know how to make sense of that.
Where does the good girl, bad girl binary come from? And specifically, how is it racially different when we're talking about Black women?
Yeah. So I think the good girl, bad girl binary, it exists across all racial groups and is specifically a function of like patriarchy, right? A way to control women's sexuality, right? The good girl, bad girl is just the version that I think Black women get, right? Mm-hmm. And my framework is that there is a lot of built-in currency attached to the good girl because it aligns with respectability politics. It aligns with Black Christianity. It aligns with our inherited civil rights movement around progressiveness, right? And upward mobility. And so the things attached to the good girl status are also attached to the things that have provided almost like a racial success, right? Entree into upward mobility and higher success and education and all of those things. Mm-hmm. And the bad girl stuff is all the things that are associated with the stereotypes that we have been told keep us the gatekeepers, right? And I think that gets really, really reinforced culturally, even if it's sometimes proxy for religious beliefs. But that dynamic of like the Jezebel, the hot girl, fast, all of that language gets coded from a very early age. And the good girl is the one that is lauded because she knows how to be prim and carry herself. It's about the presentation, right? And what it looks like. And I think that piece is really the area that we need to be looking more at. Oftentimes what it looks like and what it is internally is incongruent, right? But it's almost like the performance thereof is what's rewarded. It's flat. It's so two-dimensional. It leaves so many other components out of the bigger conversation.
I love the word currency. There's a value and a currency tied to the good girl script. And I'm wondering, is that currency the same in the Black community as it would be in mainstream? Like, so if you play the good girl script, how is the currency similar or different for Black women in these two different spaces?
Yeah. So I think it's that the valence is the same, but the magnitude or the weight of the currency is different for us, right? Because we always have to take into account the intersectionality piece, right? We don't get to exist as quote unquote, just women. So there's always this intersection of the racial politics in alignment with the gender politics. And if there's any way for the systems to put white women above other women, then the systems are going to do that, right? This was part of how I even stumbled upon your research, because part of what used to frustrate me so much in the early literature. So, Dr. Dion and I go way back. We owe him. Way back. the CDC surveillance data started coming out about these disproportionate rates of STIs, in particular HIV, for Black women, the message of that back then was completely around risky sexual behavior, right? It was all victim blaming. And my cultural experience as a Black woman from the South was like, but I know white girls that's been doing all kinds of nasty stuff and bragging about it and getting away with it. And I know Black boys that wanted to be with white girls because they thought they were doing all of that nasty stuff. So there was this cultural mix match for me as well. And so I think that we have to acknowledge that at some point, right, white women have way more elasticity and freedom around that than I think Black women do.
So what you're talking about is the research, of course, that you've done is that Black women are more often perceived as being sexually available, regardless of which of these scripts. So how does that complicate the idea of being a lady in the streets for Black women?
Yeah. My goodness. So this is where my clinical hat really comes on, because I have so many clients. In fact, I just had 2 conversations just this week with clients where they ended up in really bad relationships, marriages oftentimes, because it was quote unquote the right thing to do, right? They had sort of, and this is why the good girl narrative, the lady in the streets, it is so tied to upward mobility, to material success, right? You get good grades, you graduate, you go to college, and then you get married. It's just like what you're supposed to do. Yep. And in doing that, there's a lot of self-betrayal. There's a lot of minimization of poor behavior on the partner's part. It's just a lot of superficiality, a lot of not even exploring themselves as whole individuals, certainly not exploring what they want for themselves sexually. And so they sort of capitulate to marriage, to being in a relationship with someone because it's the right time and the right person. And then when they come to see me in therapy, it's years down the line where either maybe they've been divorced, or now the marriage is sexless, or they realize like, wait, I should be able to experience pleasure, but I don't even know what that looks like. And so there is a lot of compromise, I think, and a lot of real significant deficits to overall well-being that Black women experience by buying into this good girl lady in the streets. And then on the other side, the freak in the sheets, she's locked out of that. And so I think the women Black women in particular, who probably even have healthy, normative access to their sexuality, get misperceived through a distorted lens as being overly sexual, right? There's like the binary in and of itself forces both parties to really, I like the term self-betrayal, right? Like it's almost like you can't even experience yourself fully outside of these external lenses. And what makes it so crazy for me is like, this is 2026.
But now it's also being shifted. Like we're seeing women, particularly in the media, are turning it around where we are celebrating being sexual outside the space. So like we had the Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion's WAP video. One study found that Black young women found that empowering. And then there's also this movement of Black women smaller online that are trying to be more traditional. So we're seeing, like you said, these generational changes. Yeah. How is that complicating this discussion in terms of the research or even what you're seeing in your clinical practice? Yeah,
I think what gets complicated is that we still don't name the problem in the room, and that's patriarchy. What's really missing in the research is the influence of the male gaze, and particularly for Black women. Our research around sex and sexuality hasn't sort of evolved to that level.
Yeah.
I suspect, and this would be an interesting study, Dion, I suspect that some of that is because, first of all, the people doing the research on Black women's sexuality are Black women, right? And how much of us still sort of have this internalized protection of Black men, right? We don't want to make them look bad even in the research, so we're not asking some real critical questions. But I don't think these advancements that you're talking about, or these nuances are like significantly different. A lot of my research has been around young women's relationship to themselves and scripts through the media and how they perceive themselves. But there's also one study that a student of mine, it was her master's research, and we published a study that was about attitudes with regard to how much Black women adhere to stereotypes and their male partners' perceptions of that too, right? And that the men in the sample tended to have more restrictive, harsher reactions to relationships with Black women that were non-adherent to stereotypes than women, right? So that's where this piece around the male gaze, like who are you performing for? Whether you are in relationship with a man or not, Black men or not, but that sort of framework really still muddles the water and our understanding about how we come to ourselves as sexual beings. I think it's also interesting that like Megan Thee Stallion, Cardi B, they're not new. Like we had Lil Kim, we had Foxy Brown, we had Trina. My God, right. Miami, like Trina was that girl. She still is that girl as far as I'm concerned. And then even if we go all the way back to some of the blues singers, like there was some raunchy stuff.
Well, Tina Turner, some of that played that image, you know, Josephine, Eartha Kitt. Yeah.
Yes. So we've always had those women performers that have been more subversive. I think what has changed is the profitability around those things, right?
Right.
And I think that's, and I suspect that the young women who see the Cardi B's and the Megan Thee Stallions as more empowering are also because they're looking at how those women are able to show up as financially empowered for themselves, right? Mm-hmm. So again, this like upward mobility, the success piece, right? I think what makes them stand out and what is new is that they are able to sort of subvert either or and still be successful, right? But if you look at those two examples too, and then you look at their private lives, I think you can see how some of these other themes and tenets we've been talking about from Black culture overall still are playing out. Like Megan was shot in the foot by a Black man and still tried to protect him. And then when she started to be honest about that, she was vilified by Black men and Black women who have all this internalized patriarchy, right? And then we look at Cardi B and how she has been like just emotionally misused and abused in her relationships. I mean, cheated on so many times, right? And how much that was sort of validated or made acceptable because of how she presents herself. So it's like they're evolutions, but not really.
Mm-hmm. What does this say then about what we need to be talking about with Black boys and young Black men around these two binary scripts?
Yes. First of all, let's get rid of all the podcast bros. Let's get rid of all the podcast bros mics. Like they should just be put on punishment and made to listen to podcasts like yours and other Black women. Like we really do need to start there. I think that so much work needs to be done on Black men's emotional awareness, not even emotional intelligence, emotional awareness and accountability in terms of their relational responsibilities, right? So my practice is overwhelmingly high achieving Black women and couples. And I see couples across the same sex and heterosexual spectrum. And when I have couples and there's a mismatch, typically they're coming in about desire discrepancy, right? Something has happened that their sex life isn't what they wanted it to be, but they're committed to their marriage, right? And they want to work on it. And I always end up doing way more emotional recovery, building on emotional intimacy, talking about ways to be more connected, affectionately, like the softer things that they just don't have skills, they don't have access to, right? And so that is the mismatch that is occurring in their relationships. And so I think we need to do a lot more work with younger Black men. Like I have friends that have Black boys that they're raising, and there's this transition between preteen and adolescent to where even the mom's reinforcement of like that softness goes away, right? So I think we need to be talking to them earlier in life about disassociating masculinity from being emotionless, right? And helping them have the ability to have connections with other people. There's a researcher that does a lot of research with college age students, and where she's located, her sample sizes are overwhelmingly white. But her research is focused on casual sexual encounters. And even in like consistently in her sample, she finds that the women are more focused on the man's pleasure. The man's focus is always on his pleasure, right? There's a disconnect there. And I suspect that probably gets recreated in Black relationships, sexual encounters as well. And so there's a lot of emphasis that's put on making sure that the man, right, like ejaculates, like he has a good time, and not enough at all emphasis on the Black woman, as well as like even how to advocate for that, how to articulate that, as well as the man being interested and curious about those things, right? And so I think there's been a lot of intervention, a lot of research around Black women's sexuality that has significantly outpaced Black men's sexuality. And it's probably because, again, we're in the academy doing the heavy lifting and doing the research, right? And there's still so much of work that we need to do for ourselves. I know that Dr. Candace Harkins.
She was on the podcast she was in our last year's podcast with her book, Good Sex. That just
Yes. And so I worked with her and her team on some of that research and developing the survey and the questions for that research. And so I think she is probably someone that's doing more, that's looking at Black men in specific and hetero couples. But I think that really starting to have deeper, richer conversations with young Black men is an area that we need to be engaging both clinically and in terms of research.
You've just opened up something. You brought up Candace Harkins. We were earlier talking about people that we know, and it's this group of women, particularly Black women around the country, that are doing work on Black women and sexuality. And even if we don't know each other, we know each other's work.
Yes.
Why do you think that's really important in terms of addressing these narratives around Black women's sexual scripting?
Oh my goodness, because it goes back to the like foundations of Black feminism, right? Patricia Hill Collins saying, like we are the question, so we get to ask the question, right? Our lived experiences are the validation, and only we know what the nuances, right? And the intersections of those real lived experiences. And we should get to interrogate those things. I think probably all of us are also trying to articulate and make sense of our own experiences, I don't know how true this might be for you, but I do remember when I first started wanting to do this work, because when I was a graduate student, there was nobody in my in counseling psychology, really, and certainly nobody at my institution that was doing anything like this. And so it wasn't even a question that I thought that I could begin to ask, right? And it wasn't until I was on internship and being able to do clinical work with Black women supervisors that I could begin to sort of like ask these questions and talk about these things that have been, but even then I felt a little bit of like respectability politics coming up for me of like, how will I be perceived? And like, what if I wanted to present on some of this research as a young Black woman at a conference? Like, will my colleagues take me seriously? And I had a hard time getting published in peer-reviewed journals when I first started, because the white feminist journals were like, we don't know what to do with this like hip hop or media stuff. That's not really what we do. And then the media studies were like, we don't really know what to do with this Black stuff and sexual. Like, so there wasn't really a space for us. And maybe a generation and a half removed, we're getting to a much more robust place. But if you think about like how many freaking studies are there on attachment, right? Like 7,000, right? And people are still getting their PhDs, dissertations on attachment and stuff. And so we have a long ways to go. But we do, I don't want to use the word silos, but we do tend to be scattered, right? There are very few collectives of us concentrated in one area. And then, which I think is a particular strength, is that we do tend to be multidisciplinary, but we know the academy doesn't really reward multidisciplinary work, especially in this social political climate. So there's all of these barriers, even within the systems, to us being able to, I think, really advance the research forward. But I still find it extremely rewarding, fascinating, and like much needed work that we need to be doing. So.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question? I kind of got to wait.
I mean, we were talking.
I think I did.
But the paper that it was the foundation of my career, it was rejected from all the top journals. Now it's more accepted, but then it's got to be done in a different way. And but I think the idea of being able to have that clinical lens with the research is a real strength that you're bringing to doing this type of work.
I hope so. Because I want it to be like we understand how much human sexuality is a part of humanity, and for Black women to have so many fences, gates, boundaries around that part of our lives, to me it's really heartbreaking, and I want to be able to like significantly impact that and shift that in a positive way. Like, not like it doesn't have to be put aside. We can like hold space for all the sort of richness and complexities of who we are without shame. Right. Without freaking shame.
And I think, like you said, these fences, this policing of our sexuality, which is extremely different from other groups. We see this across the board. A lot of that is tied to, like you said, the male gaze and this expectation of performance. How do you think we can redefine that then to center autonomy?
That's a tough question. Being able to own that pleasure is a birthright. And I know that sounds kind of like trite, but it is so true. I see a lot of interplay between the strong Black woman schema, high achievement, and disconnection from sexuality and pleasure. I see it repeatedly in my practice. And it's that so much emphasis is put on the success and the achievement, the good girl, right? And all of that reinforces external performance, and it moves her away from even being connected to the things that bring her joy, the things that bring her pleasure, whether we're talking about erotic pleasure or not, the things that light her up. There's a whole skill deficit that then comes around knowing what I like, being able to advocate for that, because there's been no emphasis on that. There's no structure around that. And then you have a part of your life where you're like, well, I did all the things, like I checked the boxes, and yet it feels brittle or hollow, or like I'm not having orgasms, like, or I'm having sex with my husband or partner because it's what I'm supposed to do. And I hear so many times like, well, I know it's been like a couple weeks, so I usually like make sure I don't let too much time go by before we have sex. But there's no like personal, autonomy around that for themselves. And so I think starting earlier and sooner to just encourage Black women to say, what are you doing for fun? What do you like to do? What do you enjoy? And to see that not as a takeaway from that success or not as a distraction, but as something that they should have pride around, because there is a real accessibility between those simple, everyday, non-erotic pleasures and your ability to understand how to advocate for yourself for erotic and sexual pleasures, to even think about masturbation and not have shame around that, right? So we need to be doing more work around encouraging young Black women to be whole people and not just successful people, to learn how to be in relationship with other people and not just in leadership positions or the strong one or the responsible one, right? But to ask for help, to say, I can't do that, to like say, hey, you hurt my feelings. I don't want to, like, all of those interpersonal softer skills then lead, I think, a lot into the ability to experience pleasure.
So you brought the things we need to do. What's going on next with you, Dr. Coleman, then?
Oh, I love
How
that.
are you contributing? I mean, through your research, clinical, and even your other dissemination activities like workshops. Tell us
Yes.
where you're heading.
Yes. So I can talk about this stuff so much because I lived it. I am living it. I have the added role of motherhood, and that could be a whole other episode and a whole other layer of research too.
Right.
Dion, in terms of like how motherhood, especially mothering of girls, and how stuff you think you've worked through starts bubbling up, and like how you parent and all of those things. And so these are all things that I sit in active tension with personally, so that I can continue to be the model that I want to be, live the life that I want for myself, and then I can more easily talk to my clients about that, more easily feel confident about what types of interventions I think we should be using and things we should be studying. So my business, Dr. Nikki Knows, is a private practice, and I see predominantly Black women and couples, but I also offer workshops with this framework that I've developed out of this work, the sanctuary. So that's what I'm looking at these days in these pieces of authenticity, self-compassion, intimacy, and pleasure, and being the antidote to all of these things that we've talked about. At some point, I do want to working on a white paper to sort of lay out how I think about all of these things. And then, of course, I would like to be able to do some empirical research to sort of support the things that I'm seeing on the clinical side aligned with what the research shows. As you would not be surprised, there's research about authenticity and self-compassion with lots of white women samples. Intimacy and emotional intimacy is what I really mean around that. And interpersonal conflict with lots of white women and lots of white couples. But there's a huge deficit with Black women around these concepts. And so that's where I would like to be pursuing next. I am offering a workshop, in-person workshops in Houston around the sanctuary, talking about all those things. And the work that I do is the talk therapy along with embodied attunement, because that's the other thing, here as us talking heads, us academic girls, we love to live in the world of ideas, right? We can live neck up all the time. We could even talk about sex, nerd out on sex, and not have it be erotic at all. So,
right.
So the workshops that I do are around like integrating the pieces, right? You can have all the insight, but what does that feel like in your body? How do we get that information more integrated and embodied for yourself? So that is the work that I am always doing for myself, because it's a lot of programming and conditioning that gets reinforced that I have to be intentional about pushing back on, and then being able to lay this out for women in person here in Houston, because we can do a lot of things virtually, but really doing this sort of whole embodied work, healing work needs that to happen in person. So that's the stuff that I'm excited about right now.
That was Dr. Nikki Coleman sharing insights from her research and clinical work related to sexual scripts and Black womanhood. To dive deeper into Dr. Coleman's work, including how to read her articles, connect with her on social media, or maybe attend one of her workshops, head over to this episode page on the Psychology of Black Womanhood website. Thanks again for joining us on today's episode of the Psychology of Black Womanhood podcast, where research is meeting real life. We're really enjoying these discussions that are mixing knowledge with personal stories. And with guests like Dr. Nikki Coleman, we're hoping you're walking away with something valuable to reflect on. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts or tell us what you'd like us to explore next by leaving a comment on whatever platform you're listening to us. You can also stay connected with our other projects by following us on Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, just keep showing up, speaking out, and making space for the real stories of Black women's lives.